Capital Queers, Alex Reynolds Mystery. Book 3. Author, Fred Hunter. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1999. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 8. Sunday managed to pass without any of our other friends getting butchered, which made for a change. It was possibly one of the most frustrating days of my life since we didn't hear back from Nelson. Not that we expected the CIA to be working on the Sabbath, and we didn't think the Thai consulate would be open until Monday. Peter and I spent most of the day lounging in front of the television watching a marathon of Thin Man movies, and Mother spent it out cooking dinner and pampering that damn dog. When I woke up Monday morning, Peter was just getting out of bed. I lolled around in bed while he went into the bathroom and took a shower. After a while, the water stopped, and a few seconds later, Peter emerged with his hair still wet and a Kelly green towel wrapped around his waist. I hate to think that the death of our two friends had somehow caused a power surge in my libido, but as I lay there in bed watching him get a fresh pair of shorts and socks out of the dresser drawer, I was struck again with how sexy he is. Then again, in the last week, I'd seen all too clearly how quickly one's stay on this planet can come to an end, and it probably just made me cherish what I had all the more. I rolled out of bed and crossed to Peter, coming up to him from behind and slipping my arms around him. My fingers interlaced across his stomach, and my thumbs toyed with the wet, dark hair. I rested my chin on his shoulder, and he rubbed his cheek against mine, looking at our reflection in the octangular mirror mounted on the dresser. I thought we weren't a bad-looking couple. Peter smiled. Apparently, he could feel my excitement against him. I smiled back and almost laughed. For Christ's sake, I was turning into a human dowsing rod. All I had to do was get in the general vicinity of my husband, and my members started wagging. Ah, well, I guess there are worse fates. Peter turned around to face me, and we kissed much more passionately than we ordinarily would before breakfast. When our lips finally parted, he said quietly in my ear, "I'm going to be late for work." I smiled as I loosened the towel from around his waist. "You bet you are." After our impromptu liaison, Peter and I ate a quick breakfast. Then he left for work, and Mother set about her usual ritual of Monday housecleaning. She gets an almost sensual pleasure from vacuuming, a fact that I find frightening, and the damn dog was following her around as she cleaned, wagging its tail like a mad thing as if they were playing some sort of fascinating game. Mother tolerated this with a great deal of amusement until he really started getting in the way. Then with one stern look, she was able to make the dog slink quietly to a corner from which he continued to watch her with an unwavering sense of awe. This is another effect that Mother has on a lot of men. Since Peter and Mother were busy, I was relegated the chore of visiting the Thai consulate to see if this one tenuous thread would give us a lead. "It's not here," I said to Mother as she switched off the vacuum. "What?" "The Thai consulate." She crossed to me and looked over my shoulder at the phone. Book opened on my lap. "I don't think it would be under a Thai, darling. It'll probably be under consulate or consular." "What a minute," I said, something on the page catching my eye. "Look at this." I pointed to a listing for the Thai Import-Export Company of Chicago. "They could probably tell us more about an imported doll than the consulate could, don't you think?" Mother pursed her lips and thought for a moment. "You're probably right." The Thai Import-Export Company of Chicago was located in one of those faceless steel and glass office buildings that sprang up like fungus in the 60s. This particular building was on Dearborn, just south of the river. The directory showed that the company was on the 25th floor, and a quick ride on a whisper-quiet elevator brought me to their door. In a matter of seconds, I don't know what I was expecting to find when I went into the office, but it certainly wasn't the flat industrial space I walked into. At least a dozen gunmetal gray desks were pressed closely together in 2 rows. All of the desks were occupied by men, all of whom were dressed like accountants, and were feverishly scribbling as if they would be beheaded if they didn't finish their sums by closing time. The claustrophobic working conditions damn near took my breath away. Literally, I felt slightly lightheaded and found myself trying to remember if Thailand was one of those places where families lived 100 to a room. I was rescued from my near swoon by a delicate female voice which said, "May I help you?" The voice had come from the receptionist, whose desk was the only one, turned sideways so that it faced the door. She had a round face that was bookended by matching spit curls. "I'd like to see," I started to say, then realized that I wasn't really sure who it was I did want to see. "I'd like to see whoever is in charge." "Mr. Suckin?" the young woman asked. "Yes," I tried to sound sure of myself, which could hardly have been effective given the way I'd started out. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I'm sorry. I actually just need to talk to him for a minute." "May I ask what this is about?" she asked, with the exact same inflection she'd had for each question. "It's about a doll." There was a sudden cessation of the scribbling, and all of the pseudo-accountants looked up in unison. I suddenly felt like the only woman in a Japanese prison camp movie. Of course, their reaction might have been due to the fact that my request was so stupid. "A doll," the receptionist repeated, sounding only faintly incredulous. Yes, I need to ask him about porcelain dolls from Thailand, unless there's someone else who could talk to me." I heard the pseudo-accountant's pencils start scratching away at their various papers again. They were like a classroom full of children who didn't want to be called on. "No," the receptionist said. "I think perhaps it is Mr. Suckin you should talk to. Let me see if he is available for you. Your name, please." "Alex Reynolds." She picked up a phone on her desk and pressed a button, and after a brief pause, babbled something into the receiver in her own language. The only words I recognized were my own name. After another pause, she said something else, which I took to be the Thai equivalent of goodbye, or all right, or something, then replaced the receiver. "Mr. Suckin will see you," she said, rolling her black eyes up at me. "Go through that door at the back of the room." She pointed past the rows of desks to a door that was painted gold. "Thank you," I said with a slight bow. And then I mentally kicked myself. 2 minutes talking to someone from Thailand, and suddenly I was acting like a character in a bad road company of the Hokkaido. I went down the center aisles of the desk to the door, gave a single knock, and then entered. The private office was much nicer than the outer one. I suppose that was to be expected. There was a dark red carpet and a row of windows that looked out on an older building directly across the street. I half expected to find dragons on the walls, but instead there was just bland wood paneling. Mr. Suckin sat behind a huge desk that made him look smaller than he really was. He rose as I entered the room, came out from behind the desk, and gave me his hand, which was very small and rough. He then offered me a seat and went back to his place behind the desk. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Reynolds. We seldom have, I suppose you would call it, drop-in guest?" His voice was deep and soft. "Thank you, Mr. Suckin," I replied, trying to sound a bit more professional. "Call me Dave," he said with a sudden toothy grin. "Dave?" Right after I said it, I hoped to God I hadn't sounded as astonished as I felt. He nodded. "It is my American name. You Americans are so informal. You like to use Christian names, I believe. Unfortunately, very early on, I discovered that people were stumbling over my real name. I thought it would be easier for them if I just let them call me Dave." "That's very diplomatic of you," I said, not really knowing what else to say, but since he'd stopped talking and was sitting there with his hands folded and his eager eyes pointed at me, I figured I was supposed to say something. "Now," he continued, "Mrs. Bonnyard said that there was a matter you would like to discuss with me." I blinked for a minute. I thought he'd said Miss Bunny Rabbit, and it was a few seconds before I realized he was referring to the receptionist by last name. God, I thought, I really need to get out more often. "Yes, I was wondering what you could tell me about dolls." "Dolls?" "Yes. She said you wanted to know something about dolls. I was intrigued. That is why I told Miss Banyarat to send you in." he was going to have to stop saying her name, or I was going to get a case of the giggles. What did you want to know about it then? I took a deep breath. I was just wondering if you knew if there was anything special about some porcelain dolls that came from Thailand recently. His eyebrows knit slightly. I'm sure that dolls are very high quality. We are very proud of all the products that we make in my country, especially those that are handcrafted. Well, yes, I know. I mean, I figured that we have in our country what is called an old-fashioned work ethic. He continued to grin, but I got the impression he was making a veiled slight on the American work ethic. I choose to ignore this. What I meant was, do you know of anything peculiar about dolls that might have been shipped in America recently? Peculiar? He repeated the word as if it was new to him. Why do you ask? I sighed. I didn't know just how strange this was going to sound. Well, a friend of mine, while visiting Washington, bought a porcelain doll that was made in Thailand a few days ago. He was killed, and that doll, along with his others, was smashed by whoever did it. We thought maybe there was something. His face became a mask of absolute amazement. You don't think that sad death of your friend has something to do with a doll? I got the feeling that if I said yes, he would be hard-pressed to keep from laughing out loud. I don't know, I said haltingly. I just thought maybe there was something important about that doll. There was a pause, then he said, we ship thousands and thousands of products in this country. I wouldn't know anything about one single unit from one single shipment, and it doesn't even have to have been handled by my company. There are many, many importing companies from Thailand that operate in this country, in many cities. Yes, but... And you say there was something important about some doll, but you don't know what it was. I can't imagine what type of thing you mean. Whatever it was worth killing over, I said somewhat tersely. But the light way he was taking this was starting to get on my nerves. Then again, what I was asking was so damn vague, I don't know what other kind of response I could have expected. I don't know, I said with a sigh. I'm sorry, I'm not really sure what I'm looking for. It was the only lead we had, and I hoped you might know something. I guess I thought if there'd been some sort of, I don't know, theft or crime or something over there. If something of value had been stolen and needed to be gotten out of the country or into this country, you might know about it. Here he bridled, and I can't say I blame him. It wasn't until I saw the hardened look on his face that I realized how what I just said must have sounded. You think that one of my people had something to do with the murder of your friend? He said evenly. No, I said quickly. I didn't mean... Or that one of my people is involved in smuggling? Oh, no. This is a legitimate business, Mr. Reynolds. He sat back and folded his arms across his chest. By what right do you come here with these obscene insinuations? Are you with the government, Mr. Reynolds? I'm not a very good liar, unlike some of my loved ones who will remain nameless, so I said what I thought would sound the least elusive. Do I look like I work for the government? I don't know, he said, tilting his head as if he wanted to scrutinize me from a different angle. Government agents, I understand, try not to look as if they are agents. Mr. Suckin, Dave, I assure you I am not here on behalf of the government. I managed to make this sound very sincere because it was, after all, the truth. Look, I don't know if that doll really had something to do with my friend's murder. If it did, it doesn't have to have involved anyone from Thailand. Anybody could be responsible. All we know is that the doll came from Thailand. For a moment he looked at me as if he thought I might be unbalanced. Another thing that I couldn't exactly blame him for at that point. I must have sounded like a nut. And I was beginning to feel like one too. I had even less of an idea of what I'd hoped to find out here than when I started. But when you're grasping at straws, the straw looks pretty good until it starts to give way. We, said Dave, raising his eyebrows. He'd gone from amusement to anger, but when he caught that one word, he looked positively suspicious. My family and I said. Why would you need to find out about it? By now I had screwed the interview up pretty badly, but I thought just maybe I could allay his suspicions and get some information by falling back on grief. Well, You see, it's like this was a very close friend of mine, the man who was murdered, and I'm trying to make some sense of his death. Part of Mr. Suckin's smile returned, the part that curled up the right side of his mouth and made him look as if he were smirking at me. Ah, yes, something that you find in Western religions. Huh? In the East, we accept death, and no matter how that death is achieved, it's part of life. You're right, I said after a pause. Here in the West, we don't look at murder as an achievement. He returned a tolerant, benign smile. That is all right. I understand there are differences. I only wish that I could help you achieve peace. I'm afraid I cannot. I don't know anything in particular about any dolls. I only know that we are proud of all of our products in my country. I'm very sorry about your friend. But you, if I may be so bold as to suggest it, I think you may have to learn to accept his death for what it is. I know that it can be a difficult lesson to learn, but it is a part of life. You're right, I said after a pause. Here in the West, we don't look at murder as an achievement. He returned a tolerant, benign smile. That is all right. I understand there are differences. I only wish that I could help you achieve peace. I'm afraid I cannot. I don't know anything in particular about any dolls. I only know that we are proud of all of our products in my country. I am very sorry about your friend, but you, if I may be so bold as to suggest it, I think you may have to learn to accept his death for what it is. I know that it can be a difficult lesson to learn, but it is a part of life. Perhaps it would help you to adopt the practice of meditation. Many people have found enlightenment by contemplating the ideal of their own death. He refolded his hand. The smile, still in place, was really perplexed. I had the odd feeling that he was threatening me. If that was the case, it was the most polite threat I'd ever gotten. He rose from his chair and put out his hand to me, making it clear that the interview was over. He then saw me to the door to his office. I could have sworn that the pencils were scratching harder at their work while Mr. Suckin stood in the doorway. I hope you may find peace, he said. Oh, I think I'll find what I'm looking for, I replied. I don't know why I made it sound like a challenge, except that I didn't like being put off, no matter how civilly it was done. I walked away from him, feeling his eyes staring at my back along with the dozen pairs of eyes of the pseudo-accountants. It was like walking through a room full of those creepy paintings whose eyes seemed to follow you around the room. The only one who didn't look up was Miss Bunny Rabbit, whatever the hell her name was. She was doing her nails. It was a relief to get out of there. When I got home, Duffy ran up to greet me at the door. He stared up at me with those big brown eyes and with his little tail wagging so furiously it made me feel like a doggy bone. I'm sure Mother took you for a walk, I said. It was a split second before I realized I'd just referred to my mother as Mother to the dog. He came closer and butted his forehead against my shin. Oh, God, I said wearily as I reached down to pet him. His tail picked up speed. Darling, is that you? Mother called from the kitchen. At the sound of her voice, the dog sped to her side. Yes, I said, going in to join her. Did you find out anything? Yeah, I found out how stupid I looked trying to question someone without anything to go on. God, you should have seen the way the head of that place looked at me. Well, never mind, Mother said with a wave of her hand. Larry called while you were out. He said that Messrs. Dunn and Hamilton really are with the State Department. But of course he couldn't know whether or not the guys that came here really were Dunn and Hamilton, I countered. Mother gave me a smile and was almost patronizing. Don't be daft, dear. Anyway, he said they were with the State Department and he doesn't know what they're working on, but he made a point of telling me we were to cooperate in any way possible with them. She stopped and a perplexed look came over her. He made it sound as if he suspected that we wouldn't. I raised my eyebrows at her and she laughed. He said he didn't know what they were working on, I said. But you know, Nelson, he wouldn't tell us if he did know. Why keep it a secret? Why keep anything a secret? I said irritably. These people are crazy. They live for secrets. He also said that we weren't to let them know that we've ever worked with the CIA, Mother said. Now, what do you make of that? I dropped into a chair at the kitchen table. Nothing, except that they're all more paranoid than I am. Where does that leave us? Said Mother. It leaves us nowhere. I sat for a moment in silence and slapped my palm on top of the table. Damn those people, anyway. I don't know what kind of game they're playing this time, but whatever it is got Mason and Ryan killed, and I'm damned if I'm going to just let it go. Mother, we've got to find out what's going on. Rather, she replied, emphasizing both syllables in an imitation of an upper-crust British character in a BBC miniseries. I'm never quite sure which of us she's making fun of when she does that. The joint memorial service was held in the chapel part of the Meridew Chapel and Funeral Home, which was way up north on Claiborne. It was owned and operated by Randolph Meridew. It hardly seems possible to me that there could be such a thing as a gay mortician, since I bet the most of my brothers and sisters under the sheets would shy away from any profession that would ensure they would never get laid. But Randy Meridew probably never had that problem. He was too good-looking, far from the willowy, thin-voiced, creepy little mortician so popular in the movies and on television. Randy was a hulking, dark-haired brute who looked like he could carefully sling a body bag over his shoulder and whistle while he worked. Some guys find that alluring. Randy had also earned the everlasting gratitude and respect of the gay community by readily providing the necessary duties for people who had died of AIDS at a time when many funeral homes were refusing them. The building itself is really peculiar. It made of old, irregular gray stone piled one on top of the other, so that the building looks like an adjunct to a non-existent castle. In the center of the front wall is a pair of modern glass doors. They look completely out of place. A cave entrance would have been more fitting. I held the door open for Mother and Peter, then followed them in. Cor, there's a great turnout, isn't there? Said Mother. I shot her a dirty look to let her know I didn't think that was an appropriate observation, while blushing because I'd been thinking the same thing. The place was swarming with people, some of whom I knew and some I didn't. Makes you feel rather good to know that Mason and Ryan were so well loved. Do you know what I mean? Mother added. Yeah, said Peter, slipping his hand into mine. It's terrible that they're dead, but this makes you feel like no matter how they died, they didn't live in vain. Exactly. A show of love like this just shows that they enriched the world. I found myself wondering if there would be more than 2 people at my funeral. Randy noticed this almost right away, mainly because it's his job to do that, and he displayed a warm, compassionate smile as he headed for Mother. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, taking one of her hands in both of his massive palms. It's so nice to see you again. She smiled kindly at him and said, Hardly seems proper, since you only see me at funerals. Ah, yes, he replied, the corners of his mouth turning down with practiced elegance. This is a very, very sad occasion and quite a shock. You never really expect anyone to die, do you? Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, Well, you do, don't you? Peter's hand loosened, and Mother raised an eyebrow in my direction. Randy smiled. Ah, Alex, always the pragmatist. I meant you never expect people you know to die, but your point is well taken. His eyes suddenly caught movement by the front door, and he was off to greet the latest arrival. Mother turned a disapproving eye at me and said, I can't take you anyplace nice, can I? I'm sorry, it just popped out. The look in her eye told me that if anything else popped out of me, she might be tempted to pop it back in again, but after a few moments she relented and gave me a slight smile. It's all right, probably just the stress of this business. Peter's hand retightened around mine. We made our way through the throng in the foyer toward the doorway to the chapel. I spotted Marshal Torkelson. Up ahead, he saw me at the same time and nodded a greeting to me just as a young, earnest-looking woman with long brown hair hurried up to him. As we passed him, I heard the woman say, Are you Mr. Meridew? I had to clap my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing. With his cadaverous face, Marshall certainly looks more the part of an undertaker than Randy does. Marshall gave a rather loud sniff and said through his nose, "No, I most certainly am not." "He's over there," with which he pointed a bony index finger in the direction of the door where Randy was continuing his hostly duties. We had just about reached the doorway when a voice cried out, "Mother Reynolds, why, it's you!" Mother, Peter, and I stopped in our tracks and turned to find Steve Sullivan. Approaching us from the side, Stevie is an old friend of Peter's. He's sort of like an old-fashioned tonic. Easy to take in small doses and of questionable therapeutic value, but his heart is in the right place. "Mother Reynolds, it's so wonderful to see you. It's been an age, an absolute age." He threw his arms around Mother and squeezed her, which she accepted with as much grace as one can while having one's ribs crushed. "Stevie, dear," she said when he released her, "you know I love you, but if you don't stop referring to me as Mother Reynolds, I'll be forced to kill you, and I can do it too." Stevie grinned at her, and his eyes goggled in that way that always reminds me of Tim Curry. "Why don't I just call you Sister Grenadine?" He wheeled around toward me and said, "Isn't it too terrible about Mason and Reynolds? Just unbelievable." "Yes, it is," I said in the sober tone I almost always adopt when talking to Stevie. "I think it's compensation. And I understand that you're the one who found Ryan. How awful for you, especially since, from what I hear, he was sort of inside out. My God, there's only so much you're supposed to know about your friends." "Yes, it was awful," I replied. "But how do you know so much about it?" Stevie reared back and pursed his lips. "You must be joking. Tragedy goes through the grapevine like a brush fire." "Stevie," Peter said quietly, "would you please try to remember where you are?" He looked startled for a moment, then abashed. "Oh, yes, very serious. I forgot myself for a minute there. But don't you think Mason would find this all a bit, well, funereal?" I almost laughed. "As a matter of fact, I do." "Well," Stevie continued, looking a bit relieved, "I just wanted to stop and say hi-de-ho and to you and the missus. I have to move along. I'm trying to find my date." Mother looked absolutely scandalized. "You brought a date to a wake?" Stevie shook his head. "I didn't bring him. I met him here." "What happened to the reformed skinhead you were dating? That's not still on?" He rolled his bulging eyes so broadly they almost disappeared into the back of his head. "Oh no, Alex, dearest. He's off on his newest thing. He's found the Lord." "You're joking." No, he said, shaking his head slowly and chucking his tongue. "Skinhead to skinflute to born-again Christian. When will that boy settle down?" He started to work his way away from us, but paused and said, "Oh, by the way, my new beau, he's a tiny little thing with tiny red hair. I can't find him for all those tall people. If you see him, send him my way. I'll be at the buffet." "The buffet? There's a buffet," Mother said, looking more scandalized by the minute. "Oh, yes, in the parlor. Assorted finger food. All the spring rolls you can eat." With this, he disappeared into the crowd. Mother looked at me, her lips slightly drawn to one side. "An Asian buffet at a gay wake? What won't they do next?" We went into the chapel and found seats near the back. The room was fairly large and subdued and deep red, curtained walls that gave you a feeling of sobriety without religion. Up front, there was a large wooden cabinet that resembled an altar, but not too much, and on it there was a display of flowers, in the center of which were a pair of photos in gilded frames, one of Mason, the other of Ryan. They both looked exactly like they had when alive, happy and contented, an impish quality to their smiles. As the rest of the mourners filled in and found seats, I became more and more uncomfortable under the gaze of the pictures. I started to get the feeling that they were looking at me. "We know what you are," an amused voice said close to my ear. "What?" I exclaimed softly, turning to my right. Peter was looking at me. I didn't say anything. I looked back at Mason's picture and could have sworn his goofy smile was even wider. Why didn't you tell us, sweetie? What a lark, you're a secret agent. Oh, Christ, I said aloud. Honey, what's wrong? Peter said. Although I couldn't see Mother on my other side, I knew she was looking at me, and I could feel her concern. I returned Peter's gaze and said, I'm more stressed out than I thought I was. I know, he said, laying a comforting hand on my arm. I leaned in toward him and whispered, They know now. What? Do you realize that Mason and Ryan, they know now that we work for the government? He looked back at me for a moment, then said quietly, I suppose that's true, but they're not going to be telling anybody. I turned back to the pictures. I wasn't too sure Peter was right. And since you're an agent, sweetie, Mason seemed to be saying, you should be able to find out who did this. Yeah, right, I thought. The service was fairly short and sweet, with several of Mason and Ryan's friends giving them glowing testimonials and relating amusing anecdotes about their friendship. It kept the mood light, which I'm sure Mason in particular would have appreciated. I rolled my eyes at myself. I really hate it when anyone says they know what someone who has died would have wanted, and my two friends hadn't been dead a full week before I was doing it myself. When the speakers had finished, someone produced a guitar and lit the crowd in a rousing chorus of Sleigh Ride, hopelessly incongruous under the circumstances, aside from it being months till Christmas. But it was Mason's favorite song. On more than one occasion, he'd almost met an even earlier death at the hands of friends when they'd caught him whistling that peppy Christmas song in the dead of summer. Even though there were smiles on everyone's faces as they sang, it was the first time that people looked truly sorrowful. When the singing had ended, the crowd disassembled into a milly mass, much in the way a congregation does after church. That was lovely, wasn't it? Said Mother. They would have loved it, don't you think? As much as you could love a funeral, I guess. They formed a receiving line up there, she said, motioning to the altar. The Lapierres and the Mortons had gathered and were shaking hands with the guests who were filing by, offering their condolences. We should go and greet the families, said Peter. Wait, I said. You go on ahead. What is it, Mother asked. I pointed to the young woman who was just shaking hands with the last in the line of Morton's family members. She was dressed in a tight-fitting black dress that didn't quite reach her knees, a broad black hat with a veil of a very open weave hanging down over her face, and she was propped up in a pair of killer heels. She was accompanied by another woman who was dressed in a similar fashion to a far less dramatic effect. Linda Brown, I said. We need to talk to her. We do? Mother managed to infuse these two words with enough incredulity to knock me off balance. She knows something. You said that yourself. She knows something about Mason's murder, at least, and we need to find out what that is. Oh, yes, I remember, she nodded. But this is hardly the time or the place. We might not get another chance. Darling, I know how you feel, but I'm not sure I want you nosing around where two people have been slaughtered. With that British lilt of hers, she made it sound as if she thought I was going to play at a building site. You don't think that you could stop me, do you? Mother drew herself up to her full height, which is pretty impressive when she's angry, and crossed her arms over her chest. She didn't say anything, but she raised her eyebrows and had a look on her face that she very seldom uses on me. It's a look that says she doesn't care how far into my 30s I've gone, or whether or not I'm an adult with a husband of my own. I'll never be too big that she couldn't take a wooden spoon to my butt. I didn't mean that quite the way it sounded, I said apologetically, but there can't be any harm in just talking to her if she really does know anything. I can tell Frank. She can bloody well tell Frank herself. She's not going to do that. You saw how scared she was the other day. She practically fled the apartment when we told her when Mason was murdered. Perhaps she was just being wise. Mother, I said, trying to produce a displeased look. You've never run from a problem in your life. She tilted her head slightly and gave me a smile that made me blush. I've never fallen for reverse psychology either. She sighed and gave me a dismissive wave of her hand, much like I imagine the Queen Mum gives her vassals. Oh, all right, go question. Have fun, Peter, and I will give the family your condolences. Having just been given license to sleuth by my mother, and feeling about as ridiculous as she'd probably intended, I turned across the room to the end of the receiving line where I'd last seen Linda, only to find that she'd disappeared. I quickly scanned the room and saw that wide black hat of hers gliding over the heads of the crowd and out the door. I followed, marveling at the fact that Linda could move so evenly on those absurd high heels she was wearing. I guess it takes practice, but I still couldn't see how anyone could do it without falling forward or falling off. My own personal experience of high heels was back in the 70s, when they became a brief fad for men. The result was a broken wrist. I received when I was just about to cross the street and stopped abruptly. When the light changed, I should say my feet stopped. The upper part of my body kept going and I hit the pavement. Part of the crowd had dispersed into the outer lobby, and I had to work my way through them to catch up with Linda. She managed to reach the doorway to the parlor where the buffet was laid out before I got to her. "Excuse me, Linda," I said gingerly, catching hold of her elbow. She instinctively pulled her arm away as if she expected some sort of attack and wheeled around. "What?" she said, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "Oh, it's you." "Linda, I have to talk to you." She searched the crowd, apparently looking for help. "Ronnie? Where's Ronnie? I thought she was right behind me." "It's all right," I said in a tone I hoped was calming. "I just want to talk to you." I don't know why you would. I don't know you really." She fumbled in her black patent leather purse and withdrew a lace handkerchief. She reached up under her veil and dabbed her eyes. "Look, it's obvious that you're scared. You should talk to someone." "I talked to Ronnie," she whimpered. "I mean somebody official?" She blinked her big wet doe eyes at me, which was enough to show that she didn't know where I fit into that equation. "Are you afraid to talk to the police? My mother and I know someone on the force, so we can help, if that's it. If you'll just tell me what it is, I'll go to the police for you. You won't have to go." "Are you crazy?" she said, taking a backward step away from me and somehow still managing to stay balanced on those heels. Her face had lost that petite luster and was staring at me as if she thought I might be dangerous. "If I knew something, the police are the last people I'd want to know about it." "But why? You don't have anything to hide, do you?" "Of course not," she replied. She pressed the hanky to her nose and gave a genteel snort. "Except, I'm afraid for my life. If the police knew, everybody would find out about it, and I'd... Her eyes brimmed over with tears, and I realized just how terrified she really was. She raised the hanky to her nose again and gave a very indistinct honk. I was completely nonplussed. Linda gave every indication of wanting or needing to be comforted, but I don't exactly have a lot of hands-on experience with women. I put my arms around her, careful not to hold her too tightly, and gently patted her back. I probably looked like I was trying to burp her. I happened to glance over at the buffet and saw Stevie looking at us. He was just picking up a piece of spring roll, and when he caught my eye, he raised his eyebrows, formed a little O with his lips, then in one swift move popped the roll in his mouth and turned away. "Well, how about this?" I said quietly to Linda, who showed no sign of backing away from my tentative embrace. "Why don't you tell me what you know, and I won't tell the police for you?" "Why should I do that?" she blubbered in my ear. "Because maybe there's something I can do to help." She let out a shivering sob, then straightened up and pressed the now sopping hanky against her cheeks several times, apparently trying to dab away the tears without smearing her makeup. Well, okay." She paused and looked to her left, then to the right, to make sure nobody was listening. "The day Mason was killed, it was about 4 o'clock. I heard him cry out." "You did?" "Yes. It was like..." She widened her eyes, pursed her lips, and let out an elongated "Oh!" It was very short, but pretty distinct. I could feel my forehead creasing. You didn't go down to see what was wrong? Of course not, she exclaimed with a mortified blush. She leaned closer to me and said, Mason and Ryan were sometimes noisy. She turned her head away and her cheeks became even redder, but she managed to shoot me a glance out of the corner of her eye. She seemed to be waiting for me to get her drift. When I finally realized what she meant, I said, Oh. I cleared my throat. But you didn't hear anything like china breaking? No, but I wouldn't hear anything going on in the back of their apartment. When I'm in the front of ours, our apartment is just like theirs. Same layout. And I was in the living room. It wasn't until I went back to the kitchen that I heard him cry out. She stopped and sniffed. When I realized she wasn't going to go on, I said, Is that all? What do you mean? She said with a wide-eyed blink. I mean, is that all? I don't see how hearing a cry would put your life in danger. She looked down at the floor like a guilty child, then back up at me. Well, I saw something, she whispered very softly. What? I said, matching her tone. Our kitchen window looks over the backyard. Not long after I heard the cry, I saw two men going across the yard and out of the alley. And you didn't think anything of that? I asked incredulously. Not at the time. They were dressed far too nicely for murder. Gray suits. They looked perfectly respectable. Her tears started to flow again. And you see, when you told me that Mason was murdered, at first I thought it had been at night, when Ronnie and I were away, but then you told me that it happened earlier, and I realized that must have been what I heard. I've been so frightened. Her voice caught in her throat, and the last word was released with a hiccup in between syllables. And you didn't tell the police? No, she exclaimed loudly. Then she lowered her voice again. I was trying to decide what to do, and before I did decide, Ryan was killed, and that's got me so scared. She started to weep openly, and before I knew it, she was in my arms again. I managed to ask her one last question. Could you describe the two men? She shook her head with her face till pressed against me. I just knew that once I was out of this clutch, my suit coat was going to look like a piece of modern art. No, I only saw them for a second, and that was from behind. I never saw their faces. From the back, they looked perfectly respectable. Perfectly respectable gray suits, I repeated to myself, a light dawning, and that I wished I could put out. This guy bothering you, said a husky female voice to my left. I turned my head and saw a woman considerably shorter than Linda, although that could have been mostly Hills, clad in a similar black dress, but without the hat. I recognized her as Linda's partner, Ronnie. Ronnie's complexion was ruddier than Linda's and peppered with freckles, and if she was wearing any makeup at all, it was only a touch of pale lipstick. Oh, Ronnie, Linda said as she transferred herself from my arms to her partner's. What have you been doing to her? Ronnie demanded of me over Linda's shoulder. Nothing. I was just trying to help, Ronnie snorted. You did a great job. She stroked Linda's hair and tenderly cooed. It's okay, baby. I'm sorry, I said helplessly. I didn't mean to upset her, but listen, are you two still staying in your apartment? Hell no, said Ronnie. We're staying out at my mother's till we can find another place. I don't think anybody will hold us to our lease. There was a sardonic grin on her face when she said this. The callousness of it made my skin crawl. Good, I said, because I don't think you're safe there. No shit, Ronnie said with another snort. But anybody tries to cut up one of us, and he'll be sorry. I noted the emphasis on the he. I can believe that, I thought as I went back to find my loved ones. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.